Namaskar and welcome back to Media Scan, your weekend dose of headlines, controversies and perspectives. Viewers, it's 1 year since the Russia-Ukraine conflict in Europe, and through this entire period, India has maintained a fiercely independent stand. Why did we do what we did, and what can be expected in the coming days? To understand these nuanced and complex issues, I have here with me a special panel of guests this evening. Joining me on Media Scan this evening, former diplomat, well-known author, geopolitics expert Vivek Karju. Welcome to Media Scan, sir.
Thank you.
Also with me, another former diplomat. You have been listening to him on Doordarshan on earlier occasions, S.R. Tayal. Welcome to Media Scan, Mr. Tayal. Great to have you, sir.
Thank you.
And Dr. Anshu Joshi. She is a professor in the School of International Studies in Jawaharlal Nehru University. You have also heard her on Doordarshan on earlier occasions. Great to have you, Dr. Joshi, on Media Scan.
Namaskar. Thank you.
Mr. Karju, my first question comes to you, sir. Very straight and simple question. Why did India adopt the stand that it did? And do you think, in hindsight, that was the best option for us?
I think India has conducted a very successful policy towards the Ukraine conflict. India's position evolved and evolved correctly. Initially, we were deeply concerned about the safety and welfare of our nationals, including citizens, including students who were living in Ukraine. We were successful in getting them out of Ukraine. Thereafter, we have protected our interests, we've maintained a balance, and we've also successfully navigated our requirements for fuel and food. And in fact, in this respect, we've also articulated the interests of the global South, which has been impacted by the rising food prices and rising energy prices as a consequence of this conflict.
So, thank you, Mr. Karju, for putting it so clearly in so few words. I also want to come to Ambassador Tayal here. Ambassador Tayal, sir, I was curious, Mr. Karju has thrown some light on why India took the position that we needed to take. But, we certainly did not take the easier option out. It would have been very easy to side with one camp so that our interests were protected. And particularly in the field of trade and commerce, our energy pressures, our requirements. Do you think India took the difficult stand that was available? And if yes, why do you think so?
I think India took a principled stand. And as Ambassador Vivek Karju said, India fully appreciates the security concerns of Russia and feels that US-led NATO and the Western world pushed Russia in a certain direction. And we also feel that Russia overreacted. Now, in this entire context, it is important that India's own national interests are protected and promoted, and our own relationships, which are excellent, both with Russia, United States, all NATO countries, including Ukraine, they are also not harmed. And I think we have been navigating all this minefield very, very successfully. Our Prime Minister periodically talks both to the President of Ukraine as well as President of Russia, President Biden, as well as the NATO countries heads. And Germany, the Chancellor of Germany will be in India soon. We have also continued to purchase energy from Russia, and despite initial very severe criticism from Ukraine as well as the Secretary of State of the United States, now our position has been accepted. and there is no longer any criticism. And when our foreign minister very, very clearly told the former foreign secretary of UK that what UK and entire Europe buys in one day, we buy in 1 year, or something to that effect. So our policy has been principled. It follows national interest and is also tries to find some via media that the two parties come to some kind of an understanding, if not today, then tomorrow. And Prime
Okay,
Minister's
I will
public
come
message.
back. I will come back to you, Ambassador Tayal, on that point that you mentioned about Foreign Minister Mr. Jaishankar, because I also have a particular query on that. But if I may come to Dr. Anshu Joshi here first, Dr. Joshi, there is a very pertinent question here about India's stance, the independent stand, which some people like to label as neutrality. My question to you, ma'am, is that, while we say that we have maintained an independent position, I have seen the commentariat, a section of the columnists, repeatedly saying that the stance which India took is maybe, it is for our national interest, but in geopolitics, national interest should not always be the only concern. There is something called democratic principles, and when we take a position which is neither on this side of the camp or the other side, we are indirectly helping Russia's position, which in their eyes is the aggressor, and therefore we may have gone by larger interest, our national interest, but morally India's position is not justified. Do you subscribe to the view, and what do you think these commentators and analysts should say now that we are at the cusp of 1 year of the conflict?
I would like to congratulate Government of India for taking such a balanced and pragmatic stand on this entire Russia-Ukraine crisis. We have to understand the situation and the backdrop first of all. Diplomatically, we have been enjoying good strategic partnership with Russia since a long time. On the other hand, we have succeeded in elevating our good bilateral relations to strategic relations and then strategic partnership with the United States of America. And at the same time, we do enjoy amicable bilateral relations with Ukraine. Now, considering this fact, if you go back to the old times when India announced and in fact pioneered non-alignment movement, I do see a shift from that policy today. So as our external affairs minister also stated in one of his addresses when he visited and attended the 77th annual conference of United Nations, he made it very clear that see, today India is not non-aligned. India is aligned to all those groups, all those forums, all those platforms that work on positive global agenda.
No, but just for clarification, Dr. Joshi, I get your point. I get your point, Dr. Joshi, but just a small clarification. You do not think that what you termed as this pragmatic position is antithetical to a moral position in terms of the democratic perspective, like some commentators have been writing repeatedly?
So here I would like to share a concept with you, difference between good and difference between right. So at times when you are in a situation wherein you have to look at the other side, the nature of other side, the repercussions and your own interests, considering that you have to choose between what is good and what is right. Because you brought this moral angle into this debate, that is why I shared this.
No, because Dr. Joshi, this is media scan. And I would like to be the devil's advocate and point out the issues which have been written negatively as well.
Exactly, but I have also argued in a couple of my articles that I have written on India's stand during this entire situation for past 1 year. And that is why I do believe that whatever India did, not only as an Indian, but also as a teacher of international relations, is something any country with positive agenda, with positive policy, and with considering its own national interests into the epicenter would do.
Fine. Point taken, ma'am. I'll come back to Mr. Karju here. Sir, since Prime Minister Narendra Modi said that today's era is not the era of war. And as you know, we have maintained the best of relations with both the conflicting countries. Do you think India's position as a peacemaker has really come into play in the entire situation? Because whether it is the EU leadership, the United States or other countries like President Macron, etc., they have been saying that India enjoys the unique position where it can play the peacemaker, having good relations with both the powers.
Any conflict like the Ukraine conflict, to my mind, has to become ripe for a resolution. Parties concerned and their supporters have to show an interest that they want the conflict to end, they want violence to end, they want to return to the paths of dialogue and discussion.
Right.
I do not think that either Russia or Ukraine, or the case of Ukraine, the Western countries who are supporting it, have reached that stage. Therefore, this conflict, to my mind, and I am pessimistic that it will continue. This is all the more because Russia has incorporated into its own territories the eastern and southern, some of the eastern and southern portions of Ukraine. Given that situation, I do not think it would be useful at this time even to specifically try to intervene in the conflict. The general propositions and policies that the government is announcing, that ultimately the conflict has to be resolved through diplomacy and dialogue, is correct. But I don't see any real scope for either facilitation, leave alone mediation at this stage.
So you do not think things are going to get very well too soon? Perhaps they will get worse before they get better.
Well, I think we are at a very dangerous point. You have seen the statements of President Putin, which he made, I think, yesterday.
With regard to the nuclear agreement.
You've seen this, yes, on the nuclear issue. You've seen how President Biden has visited Kyiv. So at this time, there is a kind of a passion, both in Moscow, in Ukraine, and among Ukraine supporters, which requires that the major powers, the powers concerned, navigate their positions very carefully. And that any escalatory steps be avoided.
Right, sir. Ambassador Tayal, clearly Mr. Karju is not hopeful or optimistic of a quick resolution because he thinks the concerned parties are not mentally ripe to move towards a resolution. Do you also think the same, particularly in the light of some of the recent statements that have come from President Biden, President Putin, etc.? At the same time, the same question that I put to Mr. Karju, do you think India's role as a peacemaker will come more into play in the coming days?
Unfortunately, I share the pessimism expressed by Ambassador Vivek Karju because the positions are intractable and it can move towards some kind of a resolution either if one side get defeated, which is not on the cards in the foreseeable future,
right,
or one side gets very much fatigued that they try to concede because one of the two parties will have to make major concessions in case there is some kind of a agreement. But there can be cessation of hostilities. The maximum one can think of is some kind of cessation of activity, hostilities, and some kind of an informal armistice kind of a thing that both parties keep on claiming whatever they are claiming. Ukraine, its entire, whatever was the borders before the conflict, including Crimea, and
you
Russia
mean
can keep
going
on
back
claiming.
to a status quo ante position?
Position verbally and in claims, but not on the ground. But stop firing at each other,
Right.
That is one possibility before any kind of a resolution, and that can become frozen, like North and South Korea or some kind of armistice. That seems to be the only practical move in the
But
foreseeable
moving away
future.
from that question, sir, India has
India, yeah.
managed to, elevate its
Yeah, so
position, our
second part of your
leadership.
question,
Yes, please.
that whenever that stage comes,
Right.
when the two parties are fatigued or they want to come to some kind of resolution without conceding their claim on whatever their claims are, then India is in a position to have the offer its good offices, because we have always established principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity have been narrated time and again. Prime Minister Modi has said this is not the time of war, and on major issues like the Bucha massacre, we took a stand against Russia, and
Yes.
we went for an independent inquiry. So we have a
And
certain credibility.
we told as much to the Russian leadership, if I am not wrong.
Exactly. So we have a certain credibility, and in case when the time is ripe, and I agree with Ambassador Arju that time is not yet ripe, but by the end of this year, in fact, I expect an offensive from Russia to regain as much as it can on its claimed grounds, and whatever has been annexed by them, that 4 oblasts have been annexed, and now it is Mother Russia. So,
Yes.
and
So all that talk of Mother Russia we are seeing in the headlines, and perhaps that is an indication of what things might happen. Certainly, they look like they might unfortunately get worse before they get better. But if I can just bring in Dr. Anshu Joshi here. Dr. Joshi, I want to move away from the question of India's positioning alone to a larger question here. And I wanted to say, some time ago, our foreign minister, Mr. Jaishankar, had said that the European nations or the UK, the West, if I may say, has to stop looking as if problems of Europe are the world's problems. There is a much larger global order around, which does not look at Europe's problems as their own. Of course, he was on a specific point. But on the larger question, do you think the Ukraine conflict and the subsequent developments will make the EU and other powers realize that there is a much larger world which has its own worries and concerns and interests, and the EU's or the Europe's problems are not exactly the world's problem?
Indeed, when our external affairs minister stated that Europe should come out this, view of looking at problems and opportunities and different perspectives from Europe's angle only,
Yes.
He's absolutely right in present times. Because when we look at the overall global politics, when we look at the present world order, the kind of challenges that we are facing, especially in the backdrop or shadow of COVID-19 and related things, and then we do see various opportunities and challenges associated, we see the role of global South keep taking an epicenter in the entire global politics. However, when this is seen from the angle of Russia-Ukraine crisis, we have to understand that the countries that have been involved in this war are not only Ukraine and Russia. And
Yes.
there are many experts, in fact, in media, this has been stated time and again, that this war is not between Ukraine and Russia. This war is going on between NATO, led by United States of America, and Russia. And having said that, you also have to understand that NATO, which was a military alliance, which was made during the Cold War era, to give a befitting reply to Warsaw, which was a military alliance of communist countries.
Yes.
When Cold War has ended, when Warsaw has lost its relevance, there are many experts who are asking this question, that why NATO is becoming powerful every day, why it is not becoming irrelevant, and by
And
pushing
also the
Ukraine
fact
to this
that
war.
the fact that you were right in saying that the countries involved in this conflict may not be part of the global South, but the fact remains that the impact is being felt by everyone all across the globe.
Entire world.
Yes, please make your point, Dr. Joshi, quickly, because I want to come to our other guests.
Yeah, I was just trying to sum up that we have to take an umbrella look, umbrella view, and then we have to understand the kind of world that we are living into. But the biggest outcome, the biggest repercussion of this war is that the kind of neoliberal world, the kind of multilateral world wherein we are pushing multilateral platforms and global cooperation and collaboration. From that kind of world, we have again stepped into the world of First World War and Second World War. So the world of realism, wherein power is seen from the angle of arms and territorial power.
Right. So just quickly, Mr. Karju, would you like to add some perspective to what Dr. Joshi has just flagged? And also I want to know, sir, considering what has happened in the past 1 year, is the West going to be more amenable, more open to listening to the voice of the global South, which certainly India seems to be leading?
Look, in my experience, the world is governed by power. The powerful rule the world. That is an unfortunate fact. I think what the External Affairs Minister was articulating was a principled position, and the roots of that position go to our national movement itself. All governments of India have articulated the same position, that the rights and concerns of all countries have to be respected, and that is, I think, what Mr. Jaishankar articulated extremely well. But let us be realistic. If all through history it is the concerns of the more powerful countries that and their equations that have actually been the support of the world order. The present world order is based on the world as decided by the victors of the Second World War.
Yes.
And we are all saying that that is wrong, because the world in the last 75 years has moved much beyond, but they are holding on to the power, to their power. So I believe
yes, sir.
Realism demands that we look at this through the prism of a realistic appraisal and not a theoretical position alone, even while we in the tradition which was set in the 1950s, become an advocate of what was earlier called developing world and what is now called the global south.
Yes. Ambassador Tayal, very quickly, sir, certainly it is not the 1950s, it is not even the 70s or 80s, but the fact remains that our ministers, our leadership has managed to, flag and point out the hypocrisy of the West when it comes to questions of energy or the strategic interests of nations like ours. Do you think, are you at all hopeful that there will be a change of outlook towards countries like ours in the West? And also, very quickly, sir, where do you think this conflict may be leading?
See, there has been a sea change in the world's perception of India. We are now at the high table. So what India says in whichever fora, or UN or G20 or wherever, it is taken with seriously. But whether it will have an impact on their policies, that remains to be seen, because countries are driven by their own agendas. They want to retain power or they want to change the status quo, which China is trying to do. But the individuals, their egos become very strong, and sometimes they can push the world in a catastrophic direction, like Hitler did and what Xi Jinping is trying to do. So there are so many variables, so many factors, and in that, in the minds of the United States or NATO, I still feel that the concerns of the global South will be at the bottom of their priorities. Now, as far as the future of this conflict is concerned, my own sense is this year it will continue like this, and by the coming winter, 23-24, then things will perhaps just freeze. It will not, there will be no peace, no war kind of a situation. No side will get defeated, but this conflict will continue.
Got your point, sir. I'm afraid at this point, not a very happy note to finish the conversation, but nevertheless, it's almost time to wind up the show. I really want to thank Mr. Karju, Ambassador Tayal and Dr. Joshi. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, Dr. Joshi, for finding the time for the show. And with that, we'll have to end this conversation to carry on the debate at a later episode. Viewers, like our experts have been very, very articulate in telling us whether it is the Ramayana or Chanakya or any of the modern strategic writers, only those are looked upon, only those are followed who manage to become powerful in the world order, and that remains the stark reality. On that note, it's a wind up on Media Scan for this evening. Do join us back next weekend for yet another important issue. Till then, namaskar.